Mr. T continues on KNBR, the sports leader.
Ray Ratto, Tom Tolbert back with you. The name Washington Redskins has been in the news for forever, and it's been debated certainly over the last year or so, been kind of a topic of discussion on and off, and I just kind of got tired of hearing white guys discuss whether the Washington Redskins was an appropriate name for a football team, and I happened to run across this article in Deadspin, and I really thought it was a good article, and once again, it wasn't a white guy telling me whether the Redskin name was a proper name or not. It was a member of Blackfeet Indian Nation, also comes from the Suquamish Nation. Gyasi Ross joins us, and really nice article, Gyasi.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you reading it.
Yeah, it was, like I said, what do you think when you see, because here's Bob Costas, then you have Chris Russo and Peter King, and not to say their points that they're making don't have validity to them. I just got tired of hearing, white people, Caucasian men and women, telling me whether this was a term that I should use or not. Right.
It's interesting because that's sort of the crux of the problem is that with any other, if I have a second, there's I was looking at history a little bit, and, the 2000s were an interesting time for social justice because it seems like rules liberated quite a bit. They got much more liberal. And, I listen to hip-hop music. I'm a product of the hip-hop generation. And in the Deadspin article you referenced, I made the analogy of Redskins to the N-word, to the word nigger. And I said that this is very similar, and there's been a debate, an ongoing debate within, this is very important, within the African-American community regarding the word nigger. So what I mean by that is there was an album by the rap artist Nas entitled Nigger. There's a book entitled Nigger that was from a professor at Harvard Law School, and then there was a movement by a black legislator on the New York City Council to symbolically ban the word. But the important thing is, in the context that you and I are talking about it, is that it was all done by African Americans. Whereas with the word Redskins and whether or not this is offensive and how offensive, qualitative and quantitatively, it seems like everybody else is being heard except for the people who are the stakeholders in the conversation, us, Native Americans.
How did it get to that point? Because that's one of the parts of your article. You said the Redskin debate is similar to the N-word debate, yet unlike the N-word debate, outsiders feel perfectly comfortable telling Native Americans how they should feel. How did it get to that point where they didn't ask the Native Americans, is this offensive to you? Is it not offensive to you? That everybody else just kind of took up the cause.
Well, unfortunately, on both sides, and thank God for there's been people who have done amazing work on the non-natives, liberals who have helped causes that were socially progressive. However, oftentimes people in their progressive zeal or in non-progressive zeal, their conservative zeal, tend to forget about the people who they're speaking for. And that's something that, unfortunately, that trajectory has happened. The paternalism of white Americans, the government toward the United States, toward natives in this country has been from the very inception of this country. In fact, the legal description of Indian tribes to the United States is like wards to its guardian. And so I think that this line of thinking is just a continuation of that patriarchal trajectory that was started a long time ago. White folks feel real comfortable speaking for Indians.
Well, how do the Native Americans feel about this? Because to lead off your article, and once again we're talking to Gyasi Ross, who wrote an article in Deadspin, you said the vast majority of Native people do not sit around wishing the Redskins would change their name. How, and it's hard to take a consensus for any group, but when you think about it, how does it hit you? How does it hit the people you talk to? Is it something you say, well, if I really thought about it, I don't really like it, but it's not something I think about a whole lot?
Yeah, keep in mind that what's considered struggling in the United States, so, we had a recession when our people were at 8% unemployment, is doing pretty good by reservation standards. Most reservation where I come from suffers with about 70% unemployment. So given those demographics, it's difficult to be focused on something that's so incredibly, it doesn't seem like the cause and effect is there with immediate gratification. That said, I think that, I'm actually doing some informal polling, giving my, fortunate platform with Indian Country Today Media Network, with Deadspin, and, getting some opinions on what people actually think, because I don't want to get too far ahead of Native people. That said, Tom, I don't think that, and I made this point specifically, I don't think consensus is the right question. How many people are offended by it? I think the question more accurately is, would this type of behavior be tolerable with any other ethnic group in the United States? Would it be okay, for example, for a group? I mean, there's academic debates happening. There's no consensus on the word nigger, for example, within the black community. Rap artists use it all the time. Samuel L. Jackson uses it all the time. People can hold them up as examples of, hey, look, there's some black people that are cool with this. However, there's not, I don't think, a white person around that would say, look, you know what, since, there's a few black folks that use this word, I feel cool, like this is okay for me to throw it around and, try it out. But that's exactly what happens with natives, is that, people try to pick off a few low-hanging fruit. Well, this Native American isn't offended by it. This Native American is not offended by it. And that's not the standard. Consensus is not the standard. Otherwise, you have to apply that standard to all racial groups. You have to apply it to the word nigger, and that's not going to happen.
Is there a sense in the Native American community that this is something that they should be paying attention to? I mean, you've already made the point, and obviously accurately so, that they have, far more important things to worry about. But are they coming to this debate now, or are they still sort of saying, you know what, we've got 70% unemployment pretty much across the, can we get to that after we've solved a real problem?
Right. I think that's a great question, and my job as somebody who's been fortunate enough to I try not to get too far ahead of my community, because my community entrusts me. And I speak, I speak for my community, but only by checking in. And with that said, I think that this most recent push, and there's actually a lot of social media that's going on in this regard now, I think it's firmly getting in front of a grassroots cross-section as opposed to just this intelligentsia/academic cross-section. And that's cool, because then we get to see, what our people actually think. And I think that the more people are informed about it, that, oh yeah, okay, I guess that's right. No other racial group, this wouldn't be acceptable for anybody else. And when we start to realize that, then yeah, I've noticed a changing in attitudes, and that changing in attitudes wasn't from this is allowable to now this is something that I hate. It's been something that it went from this is something I don't really pay attention to now this is something that's on my radar. I'm informed, and the consensus that I've seen starting to form is, and we're talking about disparate treatment versus consensus. So my argument isn't even about consensus, but I have seen a lot more people kind of react to this, this notion that they're being unfairly picked on, where nobody else, no other racial group would be unfairly picked on.
Talking to Gyasi Ross, nice enough to join us here on KNBR. One of the things, Gyasi, that I took out of the article, and there was a lot in there to digest, was why is it okay for non-natives to define how we are able to define ourselves instead of letting us define how we want to be represented?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that, part of it is there's culpability on our own behalf, too. We have to take control of that image. But part of it is from all these, you have the folks who definitely say, and I've seen a million of these messages from, we're honoring you. Well, then why don't we get to define what's honoring to us? Yeah. But also, we also have to seize control from the Marv Alberts and from the Keith Olbermans who say that this is offensive to Native people. How the hell do you know? who have you talked to? And so, part of that is just us taking control of it's really tempting oftentimes to say, well, this guy is on our side, so we're going to let him be the voice box for us. And that's just as damaging. That's just as damaging as when we allow the people, the anti-voices, do the same thing. We have to be in control of all of that messaging.
Does it come down to just the name, and you look at the Seminoles, the Utes, the Chiefs, the Braves, the Indians in Cleveland, and I'm wondering, is it just the name? Because when I look at the Indian mascot, I think to myself, good night. I mean, that thing is as goofy as can be. And I look at the Redskin mascot, and I think, you know what? The Redskin mascot is kind of looks like an honorable, badass mascot. And
he's a handsome dude.
Yeah, exactly. But when I look at the Indian mascot, I'm like, that's buffoonery is what that is. I mean, is it just the name? Like, some of these names can honor, and some of these names you could be proud to say, you know what, that's totally fine. I get that. Like, I know the Utah Utes, there's the tribe in Utah that they're saying, you know what, not only do we like the name, we want you to keep the name, and it's a good thing for us. But I'm wondering, is it just the name, the Redskin, that you look at and say, that's just not cool?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely but I think, Tom, it's a little bit larger than that. Definitely, it's the name. And, you ask my personal opinion, and I think that you can get it from the reading that it's not the highest thing on my hierarchy of priorities. But once again, it's this idea that of disparate treatment, that that it just wouldn't be appropriate for anybody else. And so when you talk about things that aren't appropriate for anybody else, you have to talk about all those other names. Absolutely. And I think that this is part of a trajectory of a larger discussion, and it's more of starts to get outside of a racial discussion and just more of a human discussion of, are any of these things appropriate? Are any of these things that really should be the fodder for people acting, badly, drunkenly, whatever? And I think that's a fair question. So, and that's not necessarily limited to just native mascots. That's also, Irish people. I mean, the Irish stereotype was very strong at one time, and as a result of that, that's where the mascots came from. And, that's an unfortunate one, too. And that's cool if I've heard people say, well, I'm very prideful. I enjoy that. And that's cool, but once again, that's a conversation that community has to have internally.
Let me ask the backhanded question here, because it's the one thing that's always sort of fascinated me, really, since you wrote this.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like, and I don't think you meant to do this, and maybe I'm misreading it.
Okay.
That when you say this is really something for Native American people to grab onto and sort of hold on to, is there any kind of fear that will allow non-natives to say, well, it's not our problem now, it's theirs, we don't even have to worry about it? Or does that not even come onto the radar?
No, it doesn't come onto the radar, because I think at some point the ability to be self-determinant of how a group defines itself. So once again, we have certain nuclear bombs rhetorically that are just sacred cows. We just don't touch them. So once again, going back to the word nigger, right? We just don't touch that, because we say internally they're having that discussion, and they might have some permission. We might have a really, really compelling rhetorical argument about us using that word or that symbolism because of hip-hop music or because of Samuel L. Jackson or whatever, but we don't touch it because that's just someplace we don't go. We allow them to define themselves. And I think that that's more the direction of, that we just, look, this is something that, we need to work out. And when I say work out, I don't necessarily even mean it in a very flattering way. I mean, I think that Native people, we have to communicate with ourselves better. And so that's a concession that, that has to happen. It's a cathartic thing. But at the same time, give us that space, that deference that you give every other racial group to do that. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think this goes, Gyasi? How does it end up playing out? It doesn't seem like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. I mean, Dan Snyder has made it perfectly clear that he's never, and he said never in caps, going to change the name. I don't know that is going to end up being the case, but how do you see this thing playing out? Because obviously there's a lot. I mean, it always comes back to money. No matter what discussion we're having, it's coming
Every
back.
single one comes down to money.
How does this work? How do you see this thing playing out?
Well, and I'm going to tell you something that's incredibly presumptuous and slightly what's the word called, delusional, grandiose, I think is the word, and that is that I'm trying to change the conversation from one of consensus to one of disparate treatment, because that's the proper argument, and you understand the difference, and so does everybody else. I've gotten tweets, I've gotten emails from literally thousands of people in the past couple days that says, man, I didn't get it before. I'm a Redskins fan. Now I get it. And that's the way you have to, to me, it's not an argument of consensus. So what? One person, if Nas makes an album called Nigger, that doesn't give every white boy justification to use that word. Similarly, if they find one native that says it's okay and he's not offended in Oklahoma by the word Redskins, that doesn't make it okay for everybody else to use the word. It's still an internal discussion. So I think that Dan Snyder, as a result of that, I think the conversation is going to start to change. And he says that now. That's just negotiation place. I'm a lawyer by trade. I understand when people draw absolutes. All it is a negotiation tactic. Mm-hmm. He's trying to save face. And and then so at some point he gets to look like literally the white knight that comes in and does the right thing after a long time, and that's cool. But he will end up changing it. The psychic told me that, and I strongly believe that will come in the next couple of years. He has, once it starts affecting the bottom line, the team sucks. And, he's not going to have a lot of – I mean, it's true. I like RG3, and I like Alfred Morris. He's on my fantasy team.
Of course he is.
Yeah. But nonetheless, the team sucks. And so the last thing they need is bad press on top of the team sucking. If they were winning, if they were the Denver Broncos, they might be able to absorb that. They can't absorb that right now.
Hey, really good stuff, Gyasi. I'm glad I ran across the article, and I just want to say thank you very much for coming on and giving us a different perspective on it. Is there anywhere people can go on the web or whatever to kind of catch up? I know you got a book coming out, How to Say I Love You in Indian. Is there a place people can go to check that out? Maybe check
Absolutely. I'm really bad at plugging my stuff, so thank you very much.
You got it.
Yes, people can find me at bigindiangyasi@twitter.com. And that's they can come check me out there, or they can find my books at Cut Bank Crick. That's all those words together. Cut like a haircut, bank like a bank, creek, CREEK, cutbankcrick.com. And the books are available there. How to Say I Love You in Indian. It's going to be a cool book. It comes out December 1st. And, I truly thank you for having me on the show. I thank you for giving voice to this perspective. I think you have absolutely the right intuition, which is, let's let the folks, the stakeholders, have some say. And I think that's a really, really evolved and progressive. So I thank you, progressive position. So I thank you for that, Tom.
Hey, Gyasi, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on with us, and best of luck with the book and everything.
Thank you.
All right, man.